Hi, this is Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington, and today I wanted to do a quick little demonstration on how I would go about doing a kind of a temp fix on a plastic nut that's been worn out. What I mean by worn out is that the nut at this point on this guitar in this particular string slot is too low for the fret in front of it. That is to say that this string slot is lower than the fret that's in front of it, and so when you play the string in open, it has this sizzling buzz as the string kind of vibrates on this fret, sort of as it would if you had like a low fret or a high fret situation. It's pretty much the same thing. You've got something in front of the string that it's just not quite clearing and it's rattling against that surface. So we need to raise this slot up a little bit. There are different ways of doing this, and I want to preface this by saying that I would not use this method to repair like a bone nut or something that's a nut that's carved out of a nice material. This would be strictly something that I would do on a plastic nut. Something that would hopefully be replaced wholesale at some point. But just to keep something kind of ticking along, and this is a pretty good fix. It will last for a decent amount of time. But I don't really want to go through the effort of going through and shimming a plastic nut, honestly. So what we're going to be using is some medium viscosity super glue, a very thin piece of index card stock. So this is just a strip of index card that I've cut to be just a little wider than the string. And we're going to need some super glue accelerator, and we're going to need a toothpick, and we're going to need an X-Acto knife. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take a little bit of this super glue, and we're going to work that. We're going to just go ahead and dab that down into the bottom of that nut slot. Kind of wipe the top of that nut off just because there's some spillover. And then we're going to take this paper and we're going to lay it down. My hands are a little shaky. I've had too much caffeine today. That's why I'm being very careful to handle these tools with both hands. We're just going to drop a little bit of accelerator on there. A note on accelerator. Some accelerators are acetone based, and you want to avoid using those on finish. And so a little bit of accelerator just drop down here on the finish. I make sure when I get my accelerator that I'm buying this stuff, which is not acetone based and can usually go on a guitar finish without any problems, and maybe create some like little streaks that you got to wipe off afterwards, but it doesn't do any damage. So we're just going to hold that there with a toothpick, and then we're going to pull that out. So that piece of paper has been glued into the bottom of that slot, and now we're just going to go in with our X-Acto knife, and we're going to just go ahead and cut that off at the edge of the nut. We're going to do the same thing back here. Might have to lift that up a little bit. So that's not going to raise it up a whole hell of a lot, so we're going to want to probably do that a couple of times. The reason that I would prefer doing this method with the paper as opposed to using sawdust, or bone dust and super glue, or just super glue itself, is because I have found over the years, and I used to do the super glue and bone dust thing, what I have found over the years is that on top of the fact that those repairs tend to last a little less long than this repair does, it also tends to grab onto the string and create this kind of, clicky, creaky sound when you tune. And so this is an idea that I came up with based on the notion that micarta, which is the material that like Martin and Gibson used to use for their nuts and saddles, is actually a paper product. So it's basically a bunch of wood fibers that are impregnated with a resin. And I went and just thought to myself, I could make something like that. I could make something like that easily and also do, really detailed repair. So basically what we're doing here is we're creating wood fibers that are impregnated with a resin. And we're just doing it with super glue as our resin, and the cardstock is our wood fiber. So I'm just going to go down here and kind of look at it from this angle, and it looks like we got about a half a string width's worth of height. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and take some super glue and kind of lay it in on top of that paper. And again, we're just going to wipe off that surface. For resurfacing the top of this nut, what I would recommend is like taking the strings off and kind of approaching it with a file in one direction, just cutting it very, very, methodically, and you can end up with a very smooth surface that may not need to be touched up with any sandpaper or anything. We're just going to go ahead and leave that there. This time I'm not going to hit it with accelerator for a little bit. I'm going to kind of let it seep into any paper that hasn't absorbed any super glue. So we're just going to go ahead and do a little count, 10 seconds, whatever. And then we're going to go ahead and hit that with a little bit of accelerator. Okay. One of the other reasons that I like doing it this way is that this way it takes a lot less time than slowly building up layers of super glue, because the layer of super glue that's required to get like a full cure out of that layer is very, very thin. And so when you're doing this repair with super glue only, you generally have to come and apply like a little tiny layer, and then apply a little tiny layer on top of that, and then a little tiny layer on top of that. And this can take quite a while, like up to 20 minutes or something like that. Whereas this just goes very, very quickly. And so we have this basically cured out at this point. And the next thing that I'm going to go ahead and do is shape the bottom of that slot, because it's likely very, very inconsistent after we've put that paper in there. I have the luxury of having these StuMac files, which are great. These are a wonderful tool if you're doing a lot of home setups. Although these are expensive, it's recommendable to have some actual nut files on hand, because there's just not really a good substitute. You can use triangle files for carving nut slots, but they just don't do as good a job as these. They'll get you through the night for a little while, but seriously, as somebody who started out, as an amateur, as we all did, these are a very, very good idea for a first investment in terms of whatever tools you're going to get. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take the size that I know that this string is, and I'm just going to lay it in that slot, and I'm just going to go ahead and give it a cut, doing very methodically one direction. The one direction thing is a technique to avoid shatter marks, which can cause these little grooves to appear in the space that you're cutting, and those grooves can sometimes cause friction. So after getting that surface, rounded, I'm just going to go ahead and feel the edge here. It may be that we can kind of chip away what's at the end with a fingernail, or it may be that we have to come in and actually use our X-Acto knife, kind of angling it a little bit towards the nut and kind of just using this finger to apply pressure. That way this thing doesn't get out of control and we don't end up slicing the strings. I also don't want to dig it into the fretboard. So that surface on the front is nice and smooth now. And the surface on the back is nice and smooth now. And if you nick just a little bit in there, it's not really going to be visible with the string in there. But that being said, try to do a neat job of anything that you do. So that's basically how I would repair a plastic nut that's been blown through. After doing this, I'm definitely going to have to set the string height in this, which would involve stringing this up to about 2 half steps below where I would normally tune the guitar. So we would be tuning the guitar to D, assuming that the player isn't going to be tuning the guitar to D. Putting our finger down here on the 3rd fret so that we have this contact on the 2nd fret, and then tapping here. And then that when it's tensioned is going to give us the actual height of the nut slot. And we're going to want to trim that nut to be fairly low. And ideally, I think what I'd want to tell somebody in terms of numbers, because it's really hard to kind of quantify the amount of height that I want to see here, I would say kind of keep like a business card in mind. About a business card's worth of space when you're holding here and tapping here is pretty ideal for what you want to see. I think, and that's what I'm comfortable telling people over YouTube. There are different measurements that I kind of keep in mind for different instruments, but that's kind of what I want to tell you guys. And your mileage may vary. You want to, play around with that a little bit when you're getting into setups, because this is a really sensitive area. This area here in first position, how high this nut is greatly determines how good your intonation is up here in first position. It also determines how comfortable the instrument is to play in first position, because this nut can cause a lot of tension in this area, and players will definitely feel that. It also impacts how you're going to set the neck and how you're going to set the string height at the bridge. So this is an incredibly important area to be very methodical about, very slow about, and very detailed about. So that's pretty much the whole deal there. If you found this video helpful, I have lots of other videos like this on my channel. Feel free to check those out. I also have a link to my website in the description of this video, which has a link to an instrument care page, which players may find interesting. I also have a link to my Ko-Fi and my Patreon in the description. And if you found this video helpful and you want to throw me a few bucks, please feel free to do so. Also, feel free to not do so if you're not in a financial position to do so, or whatever. It does help me make these videos, but I obviously have a living here, so but it is appreciated when I get those little like pings from PayPal. Anyway, share this with friends who you think might enjoy it, and thanks for watching.